Holliston. My name's John Cronin. Welcome to another episode of Just Thinking. This evening we're going to have a conversation about Holliston's comprehensive school safety program. To accomplish some level of understanding, we've invited some very important guests to our discussion this evening. We're going to first talk with Dr. Susan Kustka, Superintendent of Holliston Schools. We'll bring in Police Chief Matt Stone and Fire Chief Michael Cassidy. Good evening to all of you. Welcome. We would like to begin our conversation tonight by just sort of getting an assessment under different paradigms of lessons learned for protocol and the evolution of school safety planning, the collaboration that seems to be very important to have all levels of safety kind of covered and wrapped around, and then finally, how do you develop and maintain a culture of school safety? So first, I'll start with you. Hello, Doctor. How are you? Great to see you. So the first thing I want to find out is, are Holliston schools safe?
I think to the extent that schools can be safe, we do a really good job around safety. This is my 6th year in the district, and I really feel very confident and very proud of the work that we've done. Both these gentlemen sit on the safety committee with us, and we have regular check-ins, usually about 5 or 6 times a year with a full committee on safety. But since I've been here, we've actually put in fob access so staff can get in without propping doors. That had been an area of concern during COVID and even before that. Doors propped open has been really, I would say, curtailed quite a bit. We've increased our walkie-talkies to be able to have better communication when people are outside of the building. We've added camera access inside and outside. We didn't have any cameras inside when I got here.
Schools.
These are all schools, right? All 4 buildings have some cameras inside, and all 4 have cameras outside as well.
Right. The question, I mean, it's a parent question. Are schools safe, right? And nothing can be ever airtight or completely safe. But I think it's important that people understand what steps are we taking to get there. And so tonight I'm hoping to hear a little bit more details around the hardening of the schools, but also the programmatic piece that makes it all work. So in terms of school safety, is there a program, Doctor, that in addition to these improvements that you've made that you want to expand on and let parents and people that are concerned about school safety know a little bit more about?
Yeah, we've really worked hard to make sure that drills are happening at all buildings. We don't really share the exact details of the drills because we want to make sure that we're not giving details away to someone that could be a threat as well. Sure. But from the pre-K all the way up, we've had staff and students trained each year, and we've actually put together a list so that making sure that those drills happen regularly. The chief of police and the chief of the fire chief are both involved in those. Right. And again, that is an area that we felt needed to be ramped up. Not all 4 buildings were doing that regularly, and now I feel confident that they are all doing that training.
We're here to talk about Holliston School Safety Plan, and we certainly have some of the best experts here tonight to talk about that. But one thing I'd like to hear is if there's any influence from outside Holliston, whether it's the Superintendents Association, School Committees Association, police chiefs, so on and so forth, or any regional groups that talk about it and help you feature any improvements or changes or mutual aid and things like that. That's also something I think people would like to hear a little bit more about. So Chief, let me turn to you. Great to see you again. From a law enforcement perspective, what are the primary emerging threats Holliston PD trains for, and how does your department view its role in the school space?
Great, thanks for having us, John.
Pleasure.
We train regularly with now police and EMS and fire on a integrated approach to school safety, not only for active shooters, but for intruder response. Some of the emerging threats that we see are not only active shooters and intruder response, but we're seeing threats come in digitally through social media. There's a lot of hoaxing. It's called swatting, where people are submitting anonymous tips or anonymous threats to schools that may or may not be true. However, we, public safety, fire, and the schools have to treat it as if it were, real. We've also done a lot of threat assessments, behavioral threat assessments on students, on our buildings, and making sure that we can be as secure as we can. Behavioral assessment on students when students are acting out or maybe acting differently. We have systems in place.
Let me without naming names, of course, but let me
Sure.
drill into that for a quick second, because I think parents, and I was one, I had kids in the system. So say something happens, a middle school student says or does something that probably he or she shouldn't say or do, but it's a serious threat, and you have to take it that way. What does the school and how does the law enforcement integrate to address the issue factually, and then wind it down to where it needs to go, possibly with parental involvement and hopefully some retraining or some kind of education to the student in this case? Is that something that you do? Talk a little bit about how that goes.
Sure, it is, and I think a lot of it is, if there's one word to take away from tonight, I think is relationships, and having the relationships between our three agencies, the schools, the school staff, the counselors. We don't work in silos, so if we were to get information about a particular student, whether it be on a weekend or after school hours, that's information we share with school staff. Likewise, if school staff is dealing with a student or a faculty member or somebody they know is acting a little bit differently than they normally would, those meetings are being had with counselors, school staff, police, fire, EMS, so that we can address those and kind of speak about them before an incident erupts or escalates.
So in other words, schools may hear about, let's just make up an example, a social media event that's gone haywire. Or perhaps the police have gotten a notice through their channels that a student is doing something they shouldn't be doing. So if I understand this correctly, whatever silo hears about it is going to talk to the other one, right? That call is made pretty quickly to begin the interdiction or the interaction, right?
Yeah, and I think if it's during the school day that we hear that, that's where our SROs come in place. We're very fortunate to have 2 school resource officers for the town and the police, and they're usually the first go-to person when a threat happens or an intentional threat. The principal would reach out, grab the SRO, and they would immediately meet to decide what the next steps are. And then usually the SRO would probably meet with you and discuss what's going on.
Without getting too detailed, Doctor, is it safe to say that, as Chief Stone was explaining, officers do their training with EMS and fire and so forth? Are the subordinates under you, including administrators and principals and teachers and relative staff, do they all have a role to play? Do they all know what to do when something like this happens?
Well, that's where our drills come into place. We have drills when students aren't in the building just to train staff, and then we have drills when students are in the building so that we can practice with the students as well.
Right.
And I'll say, additionally, we have training that I'll let the chief talk to. We have emergency training that we have, what do you call them, table talk discussions with, and we're scheduling one again this year, I'm sure, pretty soon.
Let's move on. Good evening, Michael. Great to see you, Chief.
Thanks, John.
The fire department plays a critical role. Chief Stone just alluded to the cross-training with EMS. Talk to us a little bit about the fire safety and medical response planning in the broader strategy sense.
Sure. So, and just to follow up on what both of my colleagues said with regards to the threat assessment, I think to answer your question a little bit more, the threat assessment model that we use is informed by national best practices. You know, we use FBI training, we use the Virginia model from Dewey Cornell, and really the question that gets answered.
But it's always changing, isn't it?
There are some best practices, but yes, there is a continuum that happens. But what we're looking at when we do a threat assessment is really the question that we're trying to answer is, did a student make a threat or does a student pose a threat? Because with the example that you provided, a spontaneous utterance, a student may have said something. So we have to determine whether or not that actually poses a threat or that just caused concern. But again, that's all part of best practices from organizations and agencies well outside of our community. But in terms of the role of the fire department and specifically EMS, as the chief mentioned, we're not training in silos. You know, years ago, it used to be very much segmented, and the police would do their thing, fire would do their thing. Right. So now we're all training together. And this past June, you know, the Holliston Public Schools were kind enough to allow police, fire, EMS, not just from Holliston, but from neighboring communities, to do 2 days of exercises in the building. And so police personnel trained on some tactics and strategies, and EMS and fire personnel trained on moving patients and rapid treatment of certain types of wounds. And then they came together in the afternoon and they practiced it so that they could practice moving people out of a building, because it's very different from when someone calls and says, you know, we've got a teacher who's having a hard time breathing in a certain classroom. We come in with the stretcher, it rolls down the hallway, we move the patient over to the stretcher, we bring him out to the ambulance. In a dynamic situation that might be targeted violence in a school, there may be a lot of people who may have been injured, and so using a quick litter to rapidly evacuate patients out to a casualty collection point, integrating our responders with the police as part of a rescue task force, these are things that we need to practice and not just go over a PowerPoint presentation, a classroom presentation.
A couple thoughts on all that, Mike. So you touched on a lot of things. It's important that listeners know we're not just talking about threat actors or people that independently threat or actually do something bad, but it's also accidents or facility breakdowns. When I was in school, we just did the fire drill, and that was about the extent of our preparedness for any emergencies. To the students, are the students integrated here too, Doctor? Are they hearing the message about where to evacuate and how to handle an emergency that might be not just evacuate the building, but a shelter-in-place order, for example?
Yes, they learn the difference between shelter in place or whether there's a potential for evacuation. In some situations, we empower our students, the older they are, to make the choice to decide what they do with the information they have. They may choose to evacuate even if it is just a practice drill, and sometimes that does happen, and they're told what to do to reunify and come back to the building.
Right.
In most cases, they stay in the building because they kind of suspect it's a practice drill, but they are empowered to try to think on their feet just like we want our teachers to do as well.
Unfortunately, the reason we're having this conversation has happened way too often and too much. And today's students may be more familiar with these protocols and the needs for them than my generation was. But looking beyond that, a lot's changed. Chief, if I could just direct you as we move into the lessons learned phase here. So many of us look back at when did this cycle of threats and violence and harm come to children? It's not that long ago. It's a generation or so ago. And as I said to Chief Cassidy, a lot's changed, right? We learn, and frequently in the law enforcement and public safety space, you evolve. Talk a little bit about how law enforcement, Holliston PD and others, have learned from events like Sandy Hook and Columbine and some of those places that unfortunately had to cope with some of the most unimaginable tragedies.
Sure. Columbine was really the changing point that changed school safety as you see it today. Columbine back in 1999 was a simple collect officer safety was the priority. Keeping officers safe before they go into a building with an active shooter. The idea was to set a perimeter around the building, wait for SWAT team, the special tactics teams, and then enter the building. The issue is that with that is having time for intruders or active shooters inside the building with innocent students, with police, fire, EMS standing outside waiting. That all changed after Columbine. The idea now is that we make entry into a building as soon as we arrive. Whether that's one officer, whether it's two officers, whether it's EMS, we go in together. The idea is to stop the attack or stop the intruder as soon as possible. And the idea is that it stops injuries, stops death from kids or students and faculty. We learned that in Sandy Hook. We learned how quick these incidents can evolve. They can be anywhere from 6 to 12 minutes and it's over. So by the time we actually receive a call, respond to the school and enter, the incident is most likely going to be over. So the idea back in Columbine of waiting and gearing up and giving more time for the intruder, those days are over. We go in now immediately.
Yeah. There was another incident, Chief Cassidy, Uvalde. Some lessons were learned there on the emergency medical response side. Speak to some of the evolution, if you will, on that level for your space.
Sure. So we're very fortunate that in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, at the end of the Baker-Polito administration in late 2022, the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security adopted NFPA 3000 as the standard for the Commonwealth that would be used by all communities to address active shooter and hostile event response. And so that includes not only school-based incidents, but also these can happen at businesses, as we saw years ago in Wakefield. And part of that framework is the integration of EMS with law enforcement going in as part of that initial entry team. And as the chief indicated, the responsibility and the priority for law enforcement professionals as they go in is to stop the killing. And the priority for the EMS personnel is to stop the bleeding. And so they're working together concurrently because, as you indicated, lessons learned from a lot of incidents over the years was a lot of times early on, they waited until the law enforcement function was completely over before fire or EMS was allowed in to start to treat and extract people to the point where they could get transported. Now it's all happening concurrently.
Right. Doctor, we're a couple months into the school year. Students, elementary all the way up to high school, have varying levels of experience dealing with and being exposed to the training and response that might be required of them as students. Tell the listeners a little bit about what each school or age range could expect as evolved school protocols to cope with things like active shooters or accidents or need for evacuation for other reasons. What are each level kind of expecting right now? And when does that training happen?
It's already happening. Some of the schools have already done their first drills, and some of them are still scheduling some of those. We try to do at least 2 of those type a year. There's typically 5 drills a year. 3 of them are usually a fire drill we are legally required to do, and then we do 2 safety drills. And there again, depending on the age of the student, we also don't want to make students anxious, so we try to dial it down. A lot of the time it is barricading and also making sure we're locking the doors correctly. We have magnets, we have things to try to do that more quickly. So every year I feel like we revise and improve, and it's never stagnant, and we're always...
These trainings, which sound pretty active, they must also involve, as I mentioned earlier, the administration and teachers and other staff, so they know what their roles are.
Yes, and that's where the police come in as well, our SROs, and usually additional police officers will be there, and the fire chief will be there, and sometimes some of your men as well, so...
Oh, so when you're training the students during these, our fire and police are there. This is the coordinated effect.
Yes.
And these events happen several times a year, beginning, middle, and end of the year, or?
We do
in and
at
around?
least one beginning of the year, and then one mid-year. We try to do a second one.
Okay. And do parents know what's going on? Do they get a notice that today we're doing this, and you might see an expanded level of police or fire presence at your school?
Oftentimes, we'll send something out right after the drill just to let them know everything's fine, we just had a practice drill, your students are fine. If there's going to be a lot of police presence at a building for a safety reason, we do ahead of time, we'll say that. You know, when we've had things outside of the district that have been concerning to parents, and I've called the chief, and he's sometimes sent extra patrol cars. We usually notify parents ahead of time in that respect, just to say we're just out of abundance of caution, we're having extra patrols.
Got it. Certainly the team works strong here. I can really detect that there's been a lot of personal connection between these three leaders. A little bit more as we move now into the third segment of collaborative programming. And in this space, you know, the school resource officer, who I think you mentioned in a minute, do we have an SRO in each school?
We have 2 full-time SROs.
High school and the
Primarily
middle
high
school?
school, and then the other campuses, because they're so close, we
Okay.
pretty much have the same one person.
That's a link, right? That's a link in the chain, day-to-day, between your administration and law enforcement or public safety. Talk a little bit, Chief, about what the SRO's role is. What are they doing every day besides, you know, making themselves available to kids? How are they extending the effective safety to kids? Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. When I became chief in 2017, one of my first priorities was to add a second SRO full-time. I thought that was important because we had one full-time officer assigned to 4 different schools in essentially 2 different campuses, and it was a lot for one officer to handle, you know, however 2,500 students that we have. So we added a second SRO in 2017. One's assigned full-time here at the high school, and one's assigned at the Woodland Street campus to cover the lower schools. They act as basically a liaison between the police department and the schools and fire.
They're there every school day?
Every school day, yeah. So we have 2 full-time dedicated to the schools. They act as a liaison, like I said. They build relationship with school staff. They're there to intervene if they have to. But a lot of it is prevention work. A lot of it's preventing things from happening. And a lot of that is through assessments, through team meetings, through drills, like Dr. Kustka was speaking about. While we are ready and prepared to act if we have to, and our school resource officers are trained in doing so, the main goal of the SROs is prevention and trying to stop things before they escalate, before they get out of control, identify those that may need help, may need, you know, extra care or extra counseling and so forth. So it's truly relationship building, and they're there every day of the school year at special events, at sporting events and so forth.
Mm-hmm. So they're taking that mass training effect and then bringing it directly to the students day to day, reinforcing, we're here to keep you safe. If you have any problems, come see me. A little bit, Dr. Kustka, about one of the components of the Sandy Hook Promise called Say Something, the anonymous reporting platform. It would seem to me that if the SROs are doing their job and they're gaining the trust that Chief Stone just talked about, the next step is the kids now feel like, I know something. What do I do with that?
You know, that's an area where I've seen huge improvement. I think years ago, children were afraid that they would be outing a friend and they didn't want someone to get harmed. I'm hearing more and more from our principals, whether it's a threat, an intruder-type threat, or more likely it's someone might be doing self-harm, and they are concerned for their friend's well-being. Years ago, they would not say anything because they didn't want to out their friend, and now they are saying, I'm worried about my friend. They're coming forward, sometimes anonymously. That's what I do like about the Say Something anonymous reporting system, is a student or anyone that has access can anonymously report, and then they have a person 24 hours a day through this system that is actively engaging with that person, and they're finding out more and more and more. And if it seems like there is a serious issue to be worried about, then they will reach out to the police and or the
So
school.
work with me on the link. Students in a middle school class, He's concerned because he saw something or he heard something that he thinks the school resource officer told him is a bad thing. It's a young student, but they're not quite sure how to process it. If they go to their teacher or their aide, does the link of say something then kick in? Is that how it works?
Usually if they go to a
Goes
person
up.
in the building, the person then will go to the principal. So we don't necessarily involve the anonymous system. But if it's something that the child sees outside of school or is concerned about, they get training each year through this system, and we do it during their RAMS block or the DSB block at the high school, and we really retrain them each year about what that system is used for and how to access it. And we do get things that happen outside of school reported. I've gotten calls at 10 o'clock at night to make sure that I'm aware. I always make sure, and I always know we can log on and see the conversation that's been had. I can then identify which police officer has been involved, which of my administrators involved. But even still, even though the system is working really well, I still reach out to each principal after the event and make sure that they're on top of it as well.
If it's something they observe at recess on the property, though, back to the link, they say something to the teacher and they'll say, I'm not sure what I just saw, but I think the following is not right. The teacher hears this, and does that trigger the chain to then follow through on this and initiate whatever comes next? Is that how it works?
Yes, I would say, I mean, that's exactly a teacher.
Within the school environment.
A teacher or a para, if they're hearing anything of concern, they would bring it right to the principal, who would then work with the SRO. And then sometimes I'm involved when we have a concerning event. I sit in on that meeting as well.
And I believe that's normalizing behavior these days. I think the children understand, as you pointed out, this is their environment. You know, they have ownership in keeping it safe also. And as long as that trust is there, I don't think they'll feel like the act is ever going to be looked upon as you shouldn't have done that kind of thing. You know, they're heroes in their own way if they do. So, what we're about to touch on is leaking into this area, which is the mental health of students. Before the taping, I just wanted to let folks know that I plan to have a separate show sometime in December with folks from Youth and Family Services who frequently interact with students and families outside the school system. And it's not an educational issue. It's not a school building issue and an access issue. It's a school student wellness or, in some cases, a family wellness issue, and it extends. It's a whole separate dialogue, but the student still has a mental health space while they're in your school. So let's touch on it, but knowing there's more to come because the student doesn't stop being a human when they leave. They bring with them, and as you pointed out, the social media is with them all the time. So we'll get to that in December, but talk a little bit about the behavioral threat assessment and how your teams work together to involve the mental health professionals. I'll start with you, Chief, for a second, because I know a lot of what you've worked with over the years is some of those professionals coming in through the system from advocates and some of those groups joining law enforcement and so forth. How do they move into this space?
So fortunately, the district is a member of the Massachusetts Partnerships for Youth, and they do annual trainings on threat assessment. And there is an emphasis on that mental health component to equip folks from all disciplines, police, fire, EMS, schools, so that we're all speaking the same language and that we all understand, you know, as was mentioned earlier, it's the importance of relationships. And certainly, as a transport ambulance, we see a lot of behavioral health in the community. It's not limited to just school setting. So our personnel on a regular basis are getting training in our in-service as we are doing our refresher. So mental health and ensuring confidentiality, but also, as was mentioned earlier, this really is a wraparound and it's a whole of community approach that we have. We frequently are sharing information to ensure that families are getting the best services they can from the systems and not just individual siloed effects.
Great point I'd like to sort of expand on real quickly if I could, Doctor. There's a nexus here. If I'm a parent listening to this and my child has some mental health issues, all right, and they're being treated, they're doing okay, but not every day is a great day, but they're doing the best they can, they're a good kid. You folks know about it, right? That child goes to school every day, your guidance counselors and your team understands the child's profile. Is all of that data, absent any event that the child might have been involved in, is that shared with law enforcement?
To some extent. I mean, it really depends. We have to maintain HIPAA or confidentiality, FERPA, and all of that. So it's really on a need to know. Even for myself with students, I am on a need to know to the extent that I have to work with the student. We do have conversations on a regular basis, and I do think our officers know the students that have serious issues. One of the things that we put into place that I think has been very helpful, and this was with Lieutenant Barrett, is
Handle with care.
Thank you, handle with care. So even if the staff don't know everything, they know that this child has something that happened over the weekend, let's say, and it's a Monday morning. They get a message, handle this child with care. And we are very careful with what we share because we have to protect the child's confidentiality. But the people that do need to know the specifics do know, but then we also want to know that everybody who works with that child knows that there is something of concern, and be kind to this kid even more so than usual, because something unusual could be going on.
Do the parents understand the nature of how that information flows too, especially if it's a younger child?
You know, we have them in if it's an IEP situation where the child's needs are there. There's a team process, so they should know. They get walked through that process. I think there's always room for improvement, right? So I think there are parents that sometimes say, I didn't know this or I didn't know that, and then we learn that this is now an area that we have to communicate better. So I would say there are situations where maybe a parent didn't know as much, and then as things get discussed, we bring them in further and we explain how this works.
Complex issues all around here. Fire safety and maintenance, obviously we touched upon building emergencies. These were the incidences, hopefully, that never occur, but you have a fire, or you have a smoke incident, or a malfunctioning piece of equipment. The fire chief, how does your department collaborate with the school to ensure the security measures like classroom door locks don't compromise vital life safety? I'm going to guess it has something to do with inspections.
Sure. So we do inspect the schools before they open at the beginning of the school year, and then we do maintain a presence in the building on a regular basis. I'm fairly integrated into the life and the operations of the schools at all levels. I'm attending events, whether it's a play or a concert, so I'm in the buildings pretty frequently. I do presentations in classrooms. So as I'm in the buildings, not just when we're conducting drills, I'm looking around, and if I see something, I can bring it to the attention of a building administrator and say, hey, you know, it looks like this exit stuff starting to accumulate. You might want to make sure that that exit is free. But with regards to some of the solutions that the superintendent mentioned earlier, whether it's the magnets on the doors or other solutions that are integrated into our response plan, there's always this tension between fire code, building code, and school safety solutions, because the building code and fire code require people to be able to exit without delay. But when you're hardening a room, if you're putting a classroom into lockdown and you're using an auxiliary secondary locking device, that is not consistent with the building code, which says you should be able to leave. So, there's been guidance that's been issued by state fire marshals, and certainly the building commissioner gets information from his network of professionals. And we just, again, as the chief highlighted earlier, so much of this is about relationships. And so, there's an understanding that although a particular device might not meet building code on a day-to-day basis if it were to be used, if these are used in exigent circumstances and we train in when it would be appropriate to use these solutions, then of course we're not going to take a position that says it's a violation of code, therefore you can't use it. And to the point earlier when you were asking Dr. Kustka about what students are trained at different levels, at the younger grades, certainly it's the adult in the room that is the primary implementer of these plans. But as we get up into the middle school and certainly the high school at developmentally appropriate messaging, we're able to show and have high school students practice putting some of these auxiliary locking devices into practice, so that if the teacher were out of the classroom and a student needed to use this device, they know how to do so and they're empowered. And our messaging, whether it's at these auditorium presentations that we do or classroom presentations, we're equipping students to be safe not only in the building, but when they're out in society. So that when they're at the movie theater, and when they're at the mall, when they're at a house of worship, if something happens, they have a muscle memory that has been created so that they know what the appropriate response actions are, even if somebody doesn't make an announcement over a public address system.
Right, that's a great point. As we wind down and we talk a little bit about the culture that's been created here in Holliston, I'll start with you, Dr. Kustka, if you could reiterate the theme of how safety is part of the culture of any school system, but specifically here in Holliston. What does the culture look like in Holliston today? If you had to express to the listeners, talk a little bit, and especially to parents, what can they expect the culture of safety to be day to day?
I think that's where a paradigm shift has happened over recent years, because it's had to happen because the events are more frequent in other places. And we have been noted to be one of the safest communities in the state. However, never say never, right?
That's
so we want to
right.
prepare regardless. And I think initially when we were trying to really tighten up on our safety protocols, there was some resistance to that. We frequently saw doors propped. I don't know how many times we've asked the police to drive around the building and just let us know if they see things during the day. But unfortunately, your parents entrust the students to us during the school day, and we are the safe havens for those children. So we are trying as much as possible to keep the students safe in our buildings, and if that means we have to tighten up some of the security, we do. Teachers initially some felt uncomfortable with that as well. I feel like the more we've done it, sort of like what you were saying, Chief, to the muscle memory, now it's just becoming more routine, so the anxiety is down. It's lessened because the practicing helps us improve in that area, and then if a real event does happen, they don't panic. So, I will stand by that the work that we're doing is important. We will continue to improve on it. You entrust all of those children to me as the superintendent and all of us, and so we need to do our best to make sure we're doing everything we can to keep them safe.
Chief Stone, the culture that you would describe from a law enforcement perspective begins at home, I would imagine, and a little bit more. Can you talk a little bit what you would expect the culture of safety, school safety, to look like through your lens?
Sure. I think the important message is school safety is a shared responsibility. It's not the police department, it's not just the schools, it's not just fire. It's all of us coming together and identifying things that may not be right in a certain situation. It does start at home. I think modeling good behavior and talking to your kids, being engaged, knowing what's going on. Certainly with social media, being aware of what's being transpired on the phone, who's your friends communicating with, and so forth, what chat rooms you're in, and so forth. I think parents should continue to be engaged, and the idea is if you see something or hear something, to tell us. Let us put those measures in place that we have at the ready for us. Don't wait for something to happen and then say, oh, I wish I had said that, or I wish I'd noticed this about Johnny the other day, but I didn't say anything. So we have those measures in place. They're ready to go. But I would say that it's a shared responsibility among all of us. And I think when that works and we all work together, we create a very safe environment.
Chief Cassidy, I've known you for a long time. You're very much not just a student, but a practitioner of all things safety. You're phenomenal at what you do, as is Chief Stone and Superintendent Kustka. But looking to you, cast your eye ahead a little bit. We talked a lot about what's been learned since some of these mass shootings and problems have occurred that changed the school culture over the last generation. Where are things going for the safety protocols of schools and in general, and what do you envision to be sort of the future of school safety?
So one of the biggest issues that we need to address, and this was touched on briefly by Dr. Kustka earlier, is communications. There's a requirement in state law right now that there needs to be interoperability between schools and public safety. So the schools have radios that allow them to jump on our frequency and talk to us in real time if they need to. But there also is an issue of being able to communicate on those radios inside the building. So NFPA 1225, the Standard for Emergency Services Communications, addresses communications inside buildings. And so when we look to the future and we think about, is there a new high school in our future, that will be built differently because there will be a requirement for those radio frequencies to be repeated. When other buildings are being built in this community right now, in some of the industrial parks, they have a requirement to put repeaters in so that when the police go in or the fire department goes in, we can talk and we can reach our repeater so that all of our units can hear. Even with the investment in infrastructure and investment in communications equipment, there are still spots inside these buildings where it's hard for school personnel to talk to school personnel, and sometimes it's hard for public safety radios to reach our repeater as well. So I think one of the biggest issues that we're going to be facing in the future is interoperability and the reliability of our communications equipment.
Right. Final thoughts as we part. Very heavy topic, but it's something that if you don't talk about and plan, you're not going to learn much. I've got a lot of confidence in all of you. I've known all of you for many years. It's a pleasure to have you tonight, and I think people take a lot away from your input, especially parents. So, Doctor, I'll start with you. Final thoughts on the confidence of school safety programming. You've already said it. We can always do more. I think people understand that. But today, as we sit here, it's a safe school system. But where are you leaning in terms of trying to get better and trying to give people a stronger sense of school safety?
I think a lot of what we still deal with is the social media coming into schools, and that's where something like the Sandy Hook reporting system can be helpful, and that's where kids report. We definitely have increased our number of adjustment counselors in the building because you talked about the social emotional well-being of students. That is still an area of concern that seems to be growing. We have a program called Care Solace that anyone in the community can use, and they can call and get help outside of school hours or during school hours. We work very closely with...
Is that anonymous?
Well, you have to call into it, and then they initiate. They do get information from the person, but it's a way to get extra help for yourself if you need a therapist or something, because it's hard to find them.
Before we go away, programs like that, where would people learn about those kind of programs? This is the first time I've heard about that, but is that something you hear about, in a one-on-one meeting, or would parents need to contact your office to learn about these things?
It's on our website, so we have a whole website with some of the resources there. Oftentimes it's on the counselors' emails, and they have that right at the bottom of their emails, and so anyone can use that. We also use Family Services is aware, and they can help guide people that way. And yes, it does come across in meetings as well, but there is access to people if they don't have a meeting as well.
Chief, confidence level, thoughts, where we're heading?
Very high. Excuse me. Very high. I think the partnerships that we have, I can pick up the phone and call Dr. Kustka, Chief Cassidy, if we're having an incident in town. I think the priority, and I said it at the beginning, it's the relationships and building those relationships and maintaining them so that when and if, God forbid, something does happen, we're prepared and ready for that. But I have the utmost confidence that we train, and we hope we never have to use the tactics and tools that we need, but we're at the ready in terms of equipment and with training in hopes that we never have to use it, but if we have to, we're ready.
Chief Cassidy, your confidence level and your thoughts on school safety going forward?
My confidence level is very high. I think one of the distinctives that we have here in our community, we train together on a regular basis. And we're not just training for the active shooter hostile event. We're training for a systems approach. We train in incident command. We train in communication. And so both at the district level as well at the individual school level, we gather together the decision makers, the shift supervisors, the people who would be in charge should an incident occur at a school, and their backup, because unfortunately things don't always happen when the primary decision maker is in district. And so we've been doing this for years, and that training has paid off, because when there is an odor in the building, or when there is a loss of power, or there is a medical emergency, they practice what they've learned at the trainings, and it goes very smoothly, and it's a seamless response, and we all work together to ensure the safety of the staff and students and the visitors to the schools.
Ron, one quick point, I think we talked about it earlier, but there is a mutual aid effect, so that if that was an actual event, we can expect to see resources from other communities. Is that accurate?
Yes.
For whatever that event is, whether it's a fire threat act or something like that. So kind of wrapping around a little bit more to outside the community, you would do the same to Ashland or Hopkinton, Midway, and so forth.
And both of our departments have trained with our neighboring departments as they have trained and exercised at their schools, and they've exercised their plans as well.
Great. Well, I want to thank each of you profoundly. I've known each of you for a long time. We're very lucky in Holliston to have so great professionals, each of you. And so thank you very much for joining me. I think what I've learned tonight is that safety is a shared responsibility. Chief, I think you made that point very strongly. It's driven by lessons learned. Dr. Kustka, you said that early on. You drill multiple times a year, multiple grades. It filters down to all levels of the school system. We have strong protocols. I think, Chief, you talked about that. We're interoperating. We're trying to make sure that everybody knows what what to do if and when something happens. This continuous culture of vigilance and care is the way to go. It's a proven model. I want to thank you all for your commitment to doing that and keeping our schools as safe as they can be. As I mentioned, I'm hoping to have another event in another month or so relative to the wellness of a student from a mindfulness and a mental health perspective. But to wrap this up, I want to thank you each again for joining us tonight. Holliston residents, I hope you've learned something a little bit more tonight about how your public safety and school officials are keeping our children safe. If you have any feedback, of course, you can always reach me through HCAT. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you.